Before we begin, take a moment to like this video, subscribe if you haven't already, and tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from right now? Because tonight, we journey deep into one of history's strangest royal nights. A night that began with music and candles, and ended in whispers of shame that would echo through the corridors of power for centuries. This is the story of the king whose wedding night destroyed his throne before it even began. The scene opens in a palace drowned in gold and silence. Massive drapes hang like heavy shadows over the marble halls. The scent of burning wax fills the air. Outside, the bells of the city cry out in celebration, thousands of people shouting the king's name. Inside he waits, still regal, his hands trembling ever so slightly over a goblet of red wine. The room around him glows like an altar. He has everything a man could ever want, except peace. The bride enters. Her gown glimmers like frost under torchlight, 1,000 tiny jewels sewn by hand. Her face is pale, her breath uneven. Every step she takes echoes through the hall as if she were walking into destiny itself. The servants bow and close the great doors behind her, the sound of iron locking into place, sealing them away from the world. The fire crackles. The silence thickens. The king looks at her with a hunger that is not of love, but of control, of ownership, of the kind that kings are born into and cannot escape. She lowers her gaze. Somewhere deep inside her, fear blooms like a cold flower. No one outside that room would ever truly know what happened next, only that the perfect image of royal union shattered within minutes. A scream, perhaps muffled by velvet, a sound of panic, and then the unmistakable scent. Humiliation, horror, the body's betrayal of the soul. The bride, trembling, weeping, her gown stained, her pride gone. But the king did not rage. He stared, silent, expressionless. The torches flickered against the walls, and in that flicker, something inside him cracked. What should have been a night of power became the birth of disgust. From that moment, the legend began to rot. The servants spoke of it in hushed tones, of the king who could not look upon his wife again, of the queen who spent her nights alone, her laughter replaced by sobbing. The court whispered, the church murmured, and outside the gates, the people began to sense that their golden monarch was not whole anymore. The days turned into weeks, the wedding feast long forgotten. The queen's chamber grew darker. Curtains stayed closed even when the sun rose. The king stopped attending councils, his eyes rimmed with sleeplessness. He wandered the halls at night, barefoot, muttering to himself about fate, about betrayal, about the weakness of flesh. And somewhere, deep in those endless corridors of marble and madness, he began to believe that the stain, that single human accident, was not of her body, but a curse sent upon his reign. He ordered the tapestries of their wedding burned. He dismissed the midwives, the handmaidens, the musicians. One by one, he erased the memory of that night, but it lived on in him, growing, festering. The people began to call him the Hollow King. They said he slept no more, that he stared at his reflection for hours, convinced he could still see her there, trembling, ashamed. And so he locked every mirror in the palace, but her eyes still haunted him in his dreams. Seasons passed. The gardens wilted. The fountains dried. Even the statues seemed to lean away from the palace walls, as if the stone itself had learned to fear him. The queen, meanwhile, grew thin and silent, her voice barely a whisper. She moved like a ghost through the halls, the sound of her steps echoing through the emptiness. Sometimes, at night, the servants claimed they heard her sobbing behind the locked chamber door, and the king standing outside it, unmoving, listening for hours. And so the story continued, night after night, whisper after whisper, until no one could tell what was real anymore. Was it shame? Madness? Or the slow decay of a royal mind that could not bear imperfection? The kingdom began to crumble, not from war or famine, but from silence. A silence born on that wedding night. Ministers fled, alliances broke, and the palace turned into a mausoleum of golden dust. And still he wandered, through corridors lit by dying candles, past portraits of ancestors who seemed to watch him with pity. Until one night, as the rain lashed against the windows and thunder shook the city, he returned to the chamber where it all began. He sat beside the empty bed, now stripped of silk and memory, and whispered to the darkness. It began here, and so it must end here. But it didn't end. It never does. Because the tale lives on, retold in the voices of those who study the madness of kings, in the rumors of servants long turned to dust, in the pages of diaries no one was meant to read. And if you listen closely, when the night is silent enough, you might still hear the faint rustle of a gown, the echo of a sob, the creak of a door that never fully closes. The story keeps breathing, the walls remember, and the king still waits, forever trapped in the night that should have been his triumph, but became his curse. And so, we continue. The king still waits. The night never truly ended for him. It only stretched, like a candle's smoke, curling endlessly through time. He began to speak less and less, until words themselves became meaningless sounds in his mouth. The courtiers learned to read his silence, to guess his moods by the flick of a hand or the tremble of a jaw. Some said he could hear the walls breathe. Others swore they saw him standing in the courtyard at dawn, barefoot in the frost, staring at the sky as if waiting for an answer that would never come. And above it all, the palace, vast, golden, decaying, became a body of its own. The tapestries no longer gleamed. The chandeliers gathered dust like cobwebs spun from sorrow. The mirrors remained shrouded under black silk, their reflections hidden from human eyes. Inside her chamber, the queen still existed, but not lived. Her maids had been dismissed months ago, her meals left untouched. The gown from her wedding night hung in a corner, folded but never cleaned. The stain, the mark of that night, remained, a dark reminder of what could not be undone. Sometimes she would sit by the window, watching the city below. The people still living, still laughing, still carrying on as if the palace were not crumbling above them. She envied them. She would whisper to herself, "They do not know what it is to be a ghost while still breathing." In the corridors, the servants whispered their own version of the truth. Some claimed the queen had been cursed, that an old witch had placed a spell upon her before the wedding. Others believed the king himself had brought the curse, born from sins of his ancestors. Every night, the stories changed. Every night, the truth slipped further away. Then came the portraits. One morning, the artists were ordered to repaint every image of the royal couple. But when the first canvas was unveiled, the king's face was distorted, not by brush or pigment, but by something no painter could explain. The colors bled, the eyes seemed hollow, and the faint outline of the queen behind him looked as though she were fading into mist. The painting was destroyed immediately, yet the others came out the same. It was as if the curse had learned to paint itself. The king ordered all the portraits burned. And still, when he walked past the empty frames, he could see her outline shimmering faintly in the gold leaf. One night, during a storm that shattered the heavens, a servant swore he saw the queen walking through the great hall, her gown trailing behind her, glowing faintly in the dark, though her chamber doors had been locked from the outside. When they searched, the room was empty. The window stood open, the curtains fluttering like wings. But she had not fled. She had not died. She was still there, somewhere. The king could feel her, in the corners, in the mirrors, in the rustle of the sheets that no longer held warmth. He began to hear her voice, soft at first, almost tender, then louder, accusing. She would whisper, "It was not my sin, my lord, it was yours." And he would wake in the night drenched in sweat, his hands shaking, his eyes wild, as if he could see her standing at the foot of his bed. Days became indistinguishable from nights. The sun no longer reached the inner halls. The air thickened with dust, as if even time refused to enter. The guards deserted their posts. The courtiers fled. Only a few loyal servants remained, old, silent, afraid to look their king in the eyes. He had become a creature of ritual. Every evening, he would walk to the great mirror in the hall, the only one not covered, and stand before it for hours. He would trace his reflection with trembling fingers, whispering names, prayers, confessions. Sometimes, the servants said, a second face would appear behind him. A woman's face, smiling. And then the king stopped appearing altogether. His meals rotted untouched. His chamber remained locked. From within, faint sounds could be heard. Humming, murmuring, laughter that did not sound human. The legend says that when the door was finally broken open, the room was empty. The fire had long died. The walls were covered in writing. The same line over and over, scrawled in his own hand. She never left. No one ever found his body. But sometimes, when the moonlight strikes the old palace ruins just right, travelers say they can see him. A shadow standing by the window, waiting, watching, still bound to that endless wedding night. And in that silence, the story keeps breathing. The candles still burn somewhere beyond time. The queen still walks the corridors of memory. The king still searches for redemption he can never earn. And you are still listening, which means the story isn't over. It never was. It will keep unfolding, whisper by whisper, secret by secret, until history itself forgets where truth ends and the nightmare begins. The palace no longer belonged to the living. It became a tomb that refused to understand it was dead. Moss crept over the stone steps. The great banners of the crown, once symbols of glory, now hung torn, whispering in the wind like tattered ghosts. The servants who remained no longer spoke. They communicated through glances, through fear, through the quiet sound of footsteps that dared not echo too loudly. Outside, the city changed. New rulers rose, empires shifted, but the palace remained untouched, an abandoned monument to a story no one dared to tell aloud. Children were warned never to wander near it at dusk, for they said the air around those walls was cursed, that voices could be heard calling from the windows when the moonlight touched the glass. But inside, time had not passed at all. In a forgotten room near the old chapel, someone found a diary, thin, bound in red leather, the ink faded but still legible. It was hers, the queen's. Her words were brittle, trembling across the page like the voice of a dying flame. They dressed me in white. They said it was purity. But I knew what it meant to be offered, to be tested. I was never a bride. I was a symbol. And when the symbol faltered, the kingdom lost its reflection. Later entries grew more desperate. He does not speak anymore. He only watches. Sometimes, I feel he waits for me to disappear. But I think it is he who is fading. And then, in the final pages, the ink changes darker, almost burnt. The mirror. It is not a mirror anymore. When I look into it, I see not myself, but the room, empty. I see the bed where I should be sleeping, and yet I am standing behind it. If you find this, know that I am still here, somewhere between the reflection and the flame. The diary ends there. No signature, no date, just a smudge, as if a tear had fallen and dissolved the ink. Years later, when scholars reopened the palace, they described an odd phenomenon. Every mirror in the building reflected a faint, almost invisible second figure beside whoever stood there. A figure in white, unmoving. When they covered the mirrors, the walls would hum, a low vibration, as if protesting. The story spread again, reshaping itself with each telling. Some said the king's soul had merged with hers, trapped forever in that reflection. Others believed he had built a secret chamber beneath the throne. A room with no doors, no light, only mirrors on every wall. And so, late explorers began searching for it. They never returned. One claimed, in a letter found years after his disappearance, that he had seen the king, still dressed in royal robes, his crown tarnished, standing before a vast mirror that rippled like water. The queen's reflection stood beside him, whispering something in his ear. The letter ended abruptly, the ink trails off the page. And the legend grew. It became a story passed in taverns, sung in half-forgotten songs, painted on the ceilings of forgotten churches. The king who could not forgive, the bride who could not escape, the night that never ended. But what few people know is that the curse did not die with them, because every generation after that, every ruler who claimed the throne, experienced a night of silence. The candles in the royal chambers would flicker, the mirrors would darken. And by morning, something would always go wrong. A betrayal, a sickness, a sudden death. Each king believed he could break the pattern. None ever did. And still, the palace remains. The rain falls through the broken roof now, but sometimes, when lightning flashes, the great mirror in the hall catches the light. And for just a second, two shadows appear, standing hand in hand, staring out through the glass at a world that long forgot. The centuries peeled away like layers of dust, yet the story refused to die. Long after the last royal banners had rotted into threads, long after the city itself had changed its name, people still spoke of the palace, not as a ruin but as something alive, something that dreamed. Scholars came first, armed with maps, lanterns, and skepticism. They called it the Mirror Palace. Though none of them truly believed the old stories, they said it was architecture, not magic, that reflections were tricks of light, that echoes were caused by the wind. But when they entered the central hall, the air shifted. It became heavier, almost liquid. Their footsteps no longer made sound. At the far end of the hall, the great mirror stood, cracked but unbroken, its surface shimmering faintly as if breathing. The explorers documented everything carefully. The symbols etched into the marble floor, the faint scent of wax and roses that should have long vanished. But then one of them, the youngest, claimed he saw movement within the glass. A shape, blurred, distant, yet unmistakably human. The others dismissed it as nerves. But later, when they checked their photographs, the figure was there, faint, pale, and standing behind them. From that day, none of the images developed properly. Faces blurred, eyes vanished, and the mirror refused to appear the same twice. Every time someone looked into it, the reflection changed. A different version of the viewer, older, sadder, sometimes smiling when they were not. Rumors spread that the mirror fed on observation, that the more people looked into it, the stronger the presence within became. Within months, the research was halted. The site was sealed, but not before one of the scholars disappeared. All they found were his notes, ending mid-sentence. "She's standing beside me again." She's. Decades later, the palace reopened briefly as a historical exhibit. Visitors spoke of a strange coldness near the West Wing, of voices in languages no one could identify. Some claimed to see candlelight flickering from windows in the highest tower, though that tower had been sealed shut for centuries. At night, guards would patrol the outer grounds, only to find fresh footprints in the snow, small, delicate, as if left by someone walking barefoot. They always stopped before the great door, as though whoever made them had entered or never left. And so the palace was abandoned once more. But abandonment here was never final. Time folded in on itself, like a mirror reflecting a mirror. Some say the king and queen are not trapped. They are dreaming. Dreaming the world we live in now. And sometimes, when you dream of old halls, of flickering candles and distant music, you are dreaming their dream, walking, for a moment, through their eternal night. Because the story was never about a single act of shame, or cruelty, or madness. It was about the weight of silence. How a single night, a single moment of human fear, can echo so long that even centuries cannot wash it away. Somewhere, in the shifting dark of time, the king still walks the corridors, tracing his hand along the cold marble walls. The queen watches him from the mirror, her reflection fading and returning with every breath. And every time someone speaks their story, even now, even you, they awaken, if only for a second. The candles flicker again. The air turns colder, and the whisper returns, soft, almost kind. "We never left." The years moved quietly, as they always do when history wants to forget. But forgetting was never an option for the Mirror Palace. When the century turned, technology crept closer to its gates. Drones, scanners, lights. A new team arrived, not with torches and notebooks, but with cables, sensors, and microphones sensitive enough to capture the pulse of dust. They called themselves the Archive Project, determined to record the last sounds of the dying building before it collapsed completely. They began their work at dawn. The air around the palace hummed with the slow rhythm of decay. Birds refused to perch on the roof. Machines glitched, batteries drained. Yet the team pressed on. Inside, the hall still looked untouched. The same gold veins across the marble, the same heavy scent of wax, faint and ancient. The mirrors, though, had changed. They pulsed faintly when someone passed. One of the researchers compared it to the faint expansion of lungs when breathing. By the second day, the recordings began to capture things that shouldn't have existed. Faint whispers at the edge of hearing. A woman's hum, a man's murmur, rhythmic, like prayer. The sounds grew louder as they approached the grand hall, where the great mirror still stood. At first it appeared dull, dust-coated, inert. Then the lights flickered. Static bled through the speakers. A soft voice, distant, fragile, emerged from the noise. "You came back." Every microphone caught it. No one spoke. The team reviewed the footage that night and noticed something else, a single frame in which a figure appeared behind them in the mirror. A tall man, barefoot, his crown twisted, his eyes dark hollows of glass. He wasn't standing still. He was moving toward them. By morning, one of the members had vanished. Her camera was found near the mirror, still recording. The last minute showed her reflection stepping away from the camera. But her body, in the background, did not move. The project was immediately shut down. Officials called it a hoax, a case of hysteria, digital corruption. The palace was sealed for the final time, this time under government order. But data always leaks. Clips of the recordings spread online. Faint voices, blurred frames, whispers repeating the same phrase in several languages. "We never left." Sometimes the phrase changes. "You brought us back." No one knows who uploaded the files. The channel that first hosted them disappeared within hours, leaving only static and the faint sound of breathing. Now, people claim the curse has evolved, no longer bound to the palace, but traveling through screens, through reflection, through the act of watching. Viewers report seeing a woman in white behind them in mirrors while watching the footage. Others hear a voice whisper their name moments before their devices shut off. Some say the king and queen no longer haunt the palace. They haunt the story itself. Every retelling opens a door. Every listener becomes another reflection in their endless night. The story begins to loop, as if the walls of time are turning in on themselves. Every researcher, every listener, every retelling adds another layer to the dream. At first it was only sound, tapes, broken audio files, a voice behind the static. Then came the images. Shifting corridors, doors that change shape when no one is looking, candles that burn even under rain. Somewhere in a city far from the ruins, a small archive receives a shipment of film reels marked only with the royal crest. No sender, no date. When they play the reels, they find fragments of the palace interior, each frame identical to photographs taken centuries earlier. Dust moves backward. Footsteps form before anyone walks. Time itself seems to remember. The archivists become obsessed. They watch the reels every night, taking notes, comparing light and shadow. And slowly, the details start to change. New corridors appear. Windows that never existed open onto landscapes no map records. The palace is rebuilding itself through memory, piece by piece, inside the film. Soon, the archivists realize that what they are watching is not merely a recording. It is the palace dreaming. Each reel is another pulse of its sleeping heart. And the more they study it, the more it awakens. Outside, rain begins to fall for days at a time. The city lights flicker with the rhythm of candlelight. Some people claim the river near the archive now reflects the palace instead of the skyline. The government blames optical interference, but those who know the legend understand. The reflection has returned. Meanwhile, in old journals discovered beneath the ruins, new passages appear, written in fresh ink on pages that should have long since turned to dust. Lines that read, "We are not gone. We are learning to remember through you." Historians call it a hoax. Philosophers call it recursion. But for those who stand close enough to the truth, it feels like something else. A slow, patient merging between the living world and the one that never learned how to end. And so the story keeps widening. Every candle lit in curiosity becomes a window. Every voice that whispers the legend feeds it breath. Until history itself begins to shimmer, uncertain of what is memory and what is dream. No catastrophe, no scream, just the steady return of something ancient and sorrowful, stepping gently through reflection, asking only to be seen, to be remembered, to continue. And it does. Always. The archives eventually fill with more than paper. The air itself thickens, scented faintly with wax and dust, as though the very idea of the palace has learned how to breathe again. Researchers notice that when they play the oldest recordings backward, faint music emerges. Slow strings, measured footsteps, and a single heartbeat layered beneath it all. No composer is credited, but the melody repeats the same pattern every 50 beats, like the turn of a lock. They begin calling it the key theme. Each time the music is played, a new scrap of information seems to surface somewhere in the collection. An unsigned letter, a torn blueprint of the royal chambers, a photograph that none of them remember taking. It's as though the palace answers in kind, offering pieces of itself to anyone patient enough to listen. One of the archivists, a linguist, spends months studying the marginal notes in the Queen's diary. She realizes the script changes rhythmically, almost musically, as if meant to be sung rather than read. When she hums the pattern aloud, the lights flicker, and a stack of papers slips from the shelf. Inside the pile is a sketch. The mirror, drawn in perfect proportion, dated centuries before the palace was even built. The discovery shifts the theory. Maybe the palace wasn't the birthplace of the legend. Maybe it was built around it, a monument designed to contain something much older, something that used reflection as its language. By now, the story has become a study of recursion. History and myth are no longer separate. They are mirrors facing each other, reflecting endlessly. Every generation writes the same tragedy under different names. A ruler, a bride, a night that turns to silence. The symbols change, the meaning doesn't. When modern cameras capture the grand mirror again, its surface no longer looks like glass. It ripples gently, as though the other side is a surface of water disturbed by breath. Technicians freeze the frame, enhance the light, and find faint lines spreading from its center. Not cracks, but veins, like those of a living eye. And still, the voice returns in the static between frames. Remember us correctly. The words repeat until the machine overheats and the screen goes black. Outside, the sky begins to mirror the architecture of the old city. Towers bending at impossible angles, streets forming patterns that match the palace floor. No one notices at first. It happens slowly, subtly, like the world shifting in its sleep. At first, the influence is subtle. Painters begin using the same cold palette of the palace without realizing why. Architects sketch buildings with perfect symmetry, two wings mirroring one another. Even the new city fountain is designed as a circle within a circle, the shape of reflection itself. No one speaks of the palace anymore, yet its rhythm has slipped quietly into daily life. Streetlights hum on the same tone as the key theme. Windows catch the evening light in a way that makes people pause, convinced for a moment that they have seen themselves from another time. A poet discovers a fragment of the Queen's diary in a digital archive and publishes it as found verse. Readers describe strange dreams after reading it, corridors of light, footsteps echoing ahead of them, a voice whispering their own thoughts back to them in perfect symmetry. The poem becomes famous for reasons no critic can explain. Across the world, small museums start reporting identical donations. A shard of mirror wrapped in velvet, a gold button engraved with the same crown insignia, and a note that simply reads, "For remembrance." None of the donors can be traced. The pattern grows. Scholars meet at conferences to discuss cultural mirroring, the way old myths repeat themselves when societies reach certain shapes of fear and beauty. They speak academically, but there is always a pause before anyone mentions the palace by name. Meanwhile, in quiet studios and libraries, people begin to notice moments of doubling, an object shifting slightly when no one touches it, voices on recordings that repeat a word twice, clock hands hesitating for a breath before moving again. It's as if the world is learning to echo. An historian, an older man who has spent his life denying superstition, writes in his final field notes, "The Mirror Palace is not a place. It is a pattern, Wherever attention lingers too long, it builds a reflection. Perhaps it is not haunting us. Perhaps it simply needs us to see it to keep existing. And that is how the legend survives. Not in ruins or royal names, but in the quiet repetition of human thought, in the way every story seeks its twin. The king and queen are no longer characters. They have become symbols of memory itself, two halves of the same gaze, one who acts, one who remembers. Sometimes, late at night, a person standing by a dark window will catch the outline of their own face and for an instant believe they are looking into another age. The air will still. The reflection will seem deeper than glass. And if they listen, they might hear a distant note of music, slow, deliberate, endlessly repeating the same cadence. That is the palace breathing again. Not in marble, not in curse, but in continuity. The story that refuses to end because it has become a way of seeing. And the world, patient as ever, keeps turning. Each sunrise a new mirror, each shadow another page, each listener another keeper of the unending night. Centuries pass, but the reflection never fades. What once lived in candlelight now hides in pixels. Screens become the new mirrors. Every lens, every selfie, every surveillance feed. All of them small surfaces waiting to remember. No one notices when the key theme begins to appear in unexpected places. A sound engineer working on a film hears a faint melody in the background noise of his recording. Slow, measured, unmistakable. He checks his instruments, finds nothing. Still, when the movie is released, audiences describe an inexplicable sense of déjà vu. They say it feels royal, tragic, beautiful. No one knows why. Elsewhere, a programmer develops an algorithm meant to clean old photographs. The code runs smoothly until it encounters one particular image, a sepia portrait of an unnamed couple. When he enhances it, the reflection in the background reveals something impossible. A figure standing behind them, holding a mirror that reflects a modern skyline. He tries to delete the file. It restores itself every time he turns on his computer, renamed simply rememberus.jpg. Meanwhile, museums create virtual reality exhibitions of lost architecture. Visitors exploring the reconstructed palace begin to report subtle sensations. A shift in temperature, a heartbeat echoing through their headphones, a whisper in a language they almost recognize. When they remove the headset, their own reflection lingers a second too long on the black screen. Across continents, journalists start calling it the mirror phenomenon. Philosophers call it cognitive recursion. Psychologists call it pattern continuity syndrome. But no one calls it what it truly is, memory learning to survive without flesh. Artists feed on it. Painters resurrect the queen's face without reference. Filmmakers recreate her wedding without knowing the legend. Writers describe her night without having read a single historical record. It's as if the story tells itself through whoever dares to imagine. And still, no one asks how it began. Because beginnings are fragile things. And perhaps the mirror doesn't want to be traced back to its origin. It only wants to continue. Somewhere in a university basement, a student listens to an old wax recording labeled Ballad for a Lost Bride. Halfway through, she hears the faint sound of someone exhaling behind her. When she turns, no one is there. But on the glass door, a single line of breath remains. Look deeper, she does. She uploads the track online. Within hours, thousands hear it. Within days, millions remix it. Within weeks, the melody exists in every corner of the internet, humming softly beneath trending songs, notification tones, even children's lullabies. And once again, the reflection grows. It doesn't haunt, it remembers. It waits inside every screen for the next listener to pause, to stare long enough for their own image to waver. And in that moment, time folds like paper. The palace breathes again. The king and queen are no longer ghosts. They are the pattern itself, written into the rhythm of human attention. Every story we tell becomes theirs. Every glance into glass, every captured image, another pulse in an endless chain. And so, the tale of the king and his bride comes full circle, yet it never truly ends. The palace, once stone and candlelight, now lives in memory, in reflection, in the patterns of human thought. The king waits in silence. The queen watches in mirrors. Time folds over itself, leaving no clear beginning, no finality, only continuity. The story is no longer bound to history. It survives in every whispered retelling, every flicker of candle or screen, every gaze into glass. It teaches us that memory, shame, and obsession are not confined to a moment. They ripple endlessly, shaping the world in subtle, invisible ways. If you look closely, even now, you may catch a glimpse of them. A shadow in a mirror, a fleeting shape in the corner of your eye, a melody in the silence. And in that glimpse, you become part of the story, the next witness in a chain that has never ended. Because some stories are eternal, some nights never end, and some reflections are forever.